In the Japanese city of Sendai, crows place walnuts on pedestrian crossings, then wait in a nearby tree for the light to turn red. When the cars stop, the crow hops down and collects the pieces of nut the tires just cracked open. Crows in a different Japanese city, an hour's flight away, do something else entirely. They just drop walnuts from power lines and hope for the best. A clumsier method that works far less often. When crows in California tried copying the trick from nature documentaries, it mostly failed. Their local walnuts have a softer outer husk that a car tire doesn't crack the same way, so the technique that works perfectly in one place doesn't simply transplant to another. Same species, same general idea, different city, different technique, different results. That gap is the whole subject of this video. Biologists are cautious with the word culture, for good reason. It's one of the easiest words in this field to reach for too early. It's not enough for a behavior to just look clever, and it's not enough for a group to simply share a habit. Plenty of shared habits are just instinct, or just every individual responding the same way to the same environment. What biologists look for instead is something narrower. A behavior that varies between groups who share the same genes and a similar environment that can be traced back to a specific origin, and that spreads through watching and copying rather than everyone inventing it independently. When all three line up, you're not looking at instinct anymore. You're looking at a tradition. Proving the third part, that it's spread through copying rather than everyone stumbling onto the same answer alone, is the hardest part, and it's usually done by tracking exactly who does the behavior, when they started, and who they spend the most time near. The case that put this idea on the map involves a Japanese macaque named Imo. In 1953, researchers on the small island of Kushima had been leaving sweet potatoes on the beach to draw the local macaque troop into the open for observation. The potatoes came covered in sand, gritty, and unpleasant to eat. One day, an 18-month-old female the team had nicknamed Imo carried her potato to a freshwater stream and washed it clean before eating. No monkey on the island had done this before. Within a year, her playmates were doing it too. Then her mother. The behavior moved through the troop along exactly the lines you'd expect from social learning, kinship and friendship, not distance or age, spreading fastest among the young, slowest among adult males who spent the least time near juveniles. Years later, some of the monkeys began dipping their potatoes in the sea instead of the stream, which happened to salt the food along the way, and that innovation spread too. The whole process took years rather than days. One careful count found it took an average of more than 2 years for each new monkey to pick up the habit, which matters, because a real social tradition should look exactly this patient and uneven, not instant. Here's where the story gets complicated, because it also produced one of the most famous myths in pop science. A popular retelling claimed that once a critical 100th monkey learned to wash its potato, the habit suddenly leapt across open water to troops on other islands with no contact at all, as though the idea traveled by some invisible field. That version is fiction. The real data shows a slow, patchy spread over several years, tracked individual by individual, moving exactly as far as actual social contact reached, and no farther. The true story needed no mysticism. A single animal's discovery copied through a real social network was already remarkable enough on its own. Chimpanzees make the clearest case that this isn't a one-species fluke. Researchers comparing 7 long-term study sites across Africa cataloged genuine cultural variation, 39 distinct behaviors, different tool techniques, grooming styles, courtship gestures that were routine at some sites and simply absent at others, even where the environment and available resources were essentially identical. Termite fishing alone showed dozens of small technical variations from community to community, each one more common inside its home group than outside it. Exactly the fingerprint you'd expect from copying, not instinct. Killer whales carry the same pattern into the ocean. Along the Pacific coast, resident and transient orca populations share the same waters but almost never mix, hunt completely differently, and eat completely different food. Residents specialize in salmon, transients specialize in seals and other marine mammals, with a specific technique and diet passed from mother to calf inside each matriline. Mothers have been seen holding a catch in their mouth, while calves learn to feed from it, passing the preference along directly. A calf raised in one tradition will apparently starve before eating what the other tradition considers food, which is a strange thing for two populations that could physically eat either one. Whale song shows how far a tradition can travel once it starts moving. Male humpback whales sing a long, evolving song, and every male in a given population usually sings the same version. But researchers tracking populations across the South Pacific recorded something they called a song revolution, an entirely new song introduced by a handful of whales arriving from a neighboring ocean region, completely replaced the old song across the whole population within a couple of months. Far too fast, researchers noted, to be explained by genetics or by every whale converging on the same tune independently. Later tracking showed that same new song continuing to move population by population, thousands of miles east, like a hit single crossing an ocean one radio station at a time. Which brings up the honest complication in calling any of this culture in the full human sense. Human culture builds on itself. One generation's tools become the next generation's starting point, accumulating complexity no single person could invent from scratch. Sweet potato washing, humpback song, and termite fishing technique are real traditions, genuinely learned and passed on, but they mostly stay at roughly the same level of complexity generation after generation, rather than stacking new innovations on top of old ones. Whether any non-human animal does that kind of building, cumulative culture is a genuinely open, actively argued question, not a settled one. Some researchers point to chimpanzee tool combinations as an early hint of it. Others think even that falls well short of what human culture does. So, do animals have culture? If you mean culture in the full human sense, layered and accumulating and building civilizations, no species studied so far clearly does that. But if you mean a behavior that varies by group, traces back to an individual's discovery, and spreads through watching and copying rather than instinct, then yes, unmistakably, in macaques, in chimpanzees, in orcas, in whales, and very likely in far more species than researchers have had the patience to compare closely enough to notice. Which means the next time a crow in your city does something slightly strange with a piece of food, you might be watching a local custom, invented by one bird, copied by its neighbors, tested against the particular nuts and traffic patterns of that one street, and existing, right now, nowhere else on Earth.